COVID-19 has resulted in me being laid off from a job I held for 3 years at an amusement park. The best parts about it happened to be the pay and perks, which were both solid motivators for attempting to make a career within the company happen. Sadly, my attempts repeatedly ran into dead ends. Once the dust started to settle, it was only a matter of time before I lost the job. As my separation date with the company looms over the horizon, I cannot say I look forward to 2021 in any capacity. At least voice acting auditions are a thing I can do to try to get something better this time around. Every time I apply for a new source of income, voice acting or otherwise, I am reminded of a book I read. A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole. Before my exile from the Pokemon fandom, my peers within had recommended A Confederacy of Dunces to me. A year later, I bought the book at a Barnes & Noble and read it. Then, in the middle of 2020, I spent time trying to write a review of it. The short version of what I originally wanted to say many months ago. I wanted A Confederacy of Dunces to be a good novel, but it is not. What I describe henceforth is the fourth and final attempt to make this video essay idea cooperate with me. Fingers crossed I get it right this time. Content warning. This observation discusses death and suicide. If you are not comfortable with either of these topics, skip to observation 2. A Confederacy of Dunces is a book which existed and continues to exist long after its author's demise. In his lifetime, John Kennedy Toole could not get any of his books published. He took his own life via carbon monoxide poisoning as a result. His mother, Thelma D. Toole, continuously pestered a different writer to get the book published. This different writer, Walker Percy, wrote a foreword talking about how he initially did not see much value in the manuscript he was given until he endured, completed, stopped to appreciate, and transcended the initial paragraphs of it. The book was written in 1969 and did not get published until 1980. John Kennedy Toole is not the only creator who died before his work could be seen as valuable to everyone else, to the point of winning a Pulitzer Prize. There are many artists, poets, and other countless creative minds who get regularly screwed over and taken for granted during their time, which leads to their pre-existing depression and other mental issues serving as catalysts for tragedy. Then, after they have perished, the work these creatives made is given the attention and respect it frankly should have gotten while they were still alive. Part of the reason I have been squeamish of discussing A Confederacy of Dunces in the past is because I am reminded I myself have attempted suicide once, through Advil overdose. My sheer incompetence with the procedure is the sole reason I failed. I stall persistent thoughts of attempting suicide again by reminding myself I remain alive out of spite towards an unjust universe, and reminding myself of aspirations to one day afford therapy and expatriation from the United States of America. Knowing I could have very well been a casualty in much the same way as John Kennedy Toole, I additionally go out of my way to attempt to help other people in whatever fashion I can muster. It's not much, and I sometimes feel like an unpaid palanquin bearer, but at least I help many to not share Toole's fate. Reminding myself of this helps me get decent sleep, with the alternative being virtually none at all. The book takes its title from a sentence in Jonathan Swift's thoughts on various subjects, moral and diverting. When a true genius appears in the world, you may know him by this sign, that the dunces are all in confederacy against him. I observe the me against the world mentality enforced by this epigram to be one which only draws pity from others. I know what true pity is like, and find it to be exactly identical to hatred. I do not want pity. I do not think anyone wants to be pitied. Not really. To pity someone implies having a condescending attitude towards others, as if you were better than them as a human being. Imagine this condescension thrust upon you in perpetuity, through a mask of feigned sympathy. Does it piss you off the same way it does me? The setting of A Confederacy of Dunces is New Orleans during the mid-1960s. A big reason why this book is regarded to be good by others is the way John Kennedy Toole depicts New Orleans as a location. Having been a local himself, Toole adds details which appeal to other denizens of the Crescent City. These details would likely not be present to this much extent if this book was instead written by someone else who, in this imagined scenario, did not know as much about the town. The main protagonist of A Confederacy of Dunces is named Ignatius J. Riley. For most of the novel, he may as well be the only character of substance because he is the only one given any amount of depth. To be an effective protagonist, it is paramount for there to be a selling point as to why I would want to read or watch anything with them in it. Some works can do this right. While Walt Disney's Beauty and the Beast is doomed to being a mediocre film on the basis of being an adequate at best adaptation of an otherwise neat fairy tale, I am compelled to appreciate both of its protagonists, Belle and the Beast. While flawed, they are both competently written protagonists who bring about the most neutral good in each other. I am able to like them both, despite their downsides. In turn, I can look forward to them going out of their way to improve throughout the course of their stories. It is, after all, what the movie promises and delivers, albeit in a way which I am not 120% happy with. Now, imagine if the flaws of the protagonists from Beauty and the Beast were laid bare for even the other characters in its universe to see, but never addressed in a meaningful way at any point. Oh, look! With Uric Salad Bar's Bad Person Bingo card, I was able to get bingo with Ignatius J. Riley 4 times! Ignatius is what I like to call an incorrigible protagonist. He's the type of protagonist who gets to persist in his virulently awful behavior, because without him the story's foundation collapses on itself. There is almost nothing likable or endearing about anything he does. He is never self-aware enough to actually change his ways. In other works which also possess incorrigible protagonists at the helm, minor exceptions can arise in the form of half-baked, last-ditch efforts of fake improvement, designed specifically to keep the consumer from completely severing their attachment to the story. Nobody in A Confederacy of Dunces is written with any shred of humanity or warmth. Everyone in this book is an extreme caricature, written to be the worst kinds of human beings possible. This way of writing reflects John Kennedy Toole's strongly contemptuous view of humans as a whole. There is a market for the kind of story Dunces tells. Media forms where almost everyone is a douchebag or dime a dozen. I could immediately cook up an example involving a popular literature series. You might know it as A Song of Ice and Fire. It's done by some bloke named George R.R. Martin. The problem is, in those other stories, there's usually a healthy amount of decent characters who are exemplary of some sort of ideal. Both Sansa Stark and her mentor, Peter Littlefinger Baelish, are consistently painted as being the logical conclusions of specific fantasy tropes if they were applied to a world as real as Westeros feels. Even if the dynamic between both characters has fundamental drawbacks, which subject me to signs of nausea, I can sympathize with and root for the both of them, or at least Sansa, to take over the rest of the A Song of Ice and Fire universe and rule it with a plutonium fist. I'm not sure Iron's going to be good enough. In saying all of this, I know for a fact there are other likable characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. People who are just as able to be easily relatable to. The way the novels are written is such where we, the readers, look directly through the lens of the specific dramatis personae and see what truly makes them tick, what truly makes them worthy of being seen as protagonists in the first place. That kind of effort and care simply does not exist in Dunces by a long shot. This detachment from humanity on the author's part dulls the sharp wit the book otherwise possesses. Even the characters written most charitably are still portrayed in such a way where I am hard-pressed to call them good people. Though A Confederacy of Dunces is a period piece reflective of the 1960s, and the writing accurately reflects this, it withstands the test of time on what can essentially be boiled down to an absolute fluke. The fluke comes from the reality of nothing having moved forward since the book's initial creation. As far as social issues go, there is still a growing misuse of the power authority figures wield. Police officers are liable to accosting, arresting, and even straight up murdering civilians for the most asinine of reasons. Even looking suspicious could result in a wrongful arrest. Dunces chooses not to criticize the police directly, but a lowly milquetoast lackey in the New Orleans Police Department is portrayed sympathetically while being abused by his superiors for not being good at his job. He later gets good at his job by arresting people who actually commit crimes. There are still people who chafe at being called Nazis while otherwise fitting the definition head on. Nazis in real life try to use the term alt-right, with which to use as a euphemism for conservatives who look like Nazis, walk like Nazis, and talk like Nazis, but find being called Nazis to be embarrassing. There are still business owners who are allowed to pay workers below minimum wage, especially as a form of blackmail to keep them in the job, lest the worker otherwise end up homeless, arrested, or even removed from the country they live in. There are still businesses and entire industries which do not allow unionizing in any form in spite of the many benefits unionization would provide for not only its workers but for the profits of the businesses which allow it. There are still people in managerial positions who are detached to the work they do, often because they are creatively stifled by manipulative people they know and cannot extract themselves from in order to lead a healthier life. There are still people whose relationships with each other will deteriorate as differences between them become irreconcilable. They will be mutually toxic to each other until a breaking point is reached where one will have to excise the other from their life in order to get anything accomplished. There are people who will continue to suffer through undiagnosed mental and social disorders. These people will slip through the cracks of a society which does not care about their state of being. Mental health care is often undervalued and underappreciated in works which attempt to discuss these things. Having institutionalization be a casual threat one makes to another person enables the threat maker to be seen as more vile a scumbag than they are supposed to be portrayed. Consequentially, the scenes in which this threat is made loud and clear become distinctly less entertaining to watch happen in front of me. There are still situations where people are unable to make the most out of their college degrees to do anything relevant with them. This could be because their degree is not essential to the area they reside, this could be because of preconceived notions about the degree they got, or this could be because of an economy which stops on a dime. There is still a condescending attitude towards people who attempt to start careers in the food and beverage industry, despite the fact they work in one of the most skill-intensive and most essential industries in existence. This attitude also causes business owners to pay them less than what they would pay others in a different role. There are still people who are directly hostile to empathy and lack it even outside of political philosophy. This is what allows people to get away with sordid acts of terrorism, such as the formation of hate mobs who become mercenaries to whichever piece of shit is the highest bidder.
In one day, it might be some game developer's abusive ex-boyfriend, unable to let go of the fact they are more successful than him at the hobby they both have stakes in. In another day, it might be some sleazy lawyer who is trying to defend a sex past, who happens to do voice acting in some mediocre anime. It doesn't matter who the highest bidder is to these hate mobs. Dunces directly addresses this by showing Ignatius's attempts to form these kinds of mobs for supremely petty reasons, and making it abundantly clear how devoid of empathy everyone in the novel is. There are still opportunists who will use others as patsies to get out of horrible situations, letting someone else take the fall for crimes they actively committed or otherwise allowed to happen. Regarding a more literary realm, I will not pretend this book is as unique or trend-setting as some people on Goodreads and Amazon have cracked it up to be. However, there are a few noteworthy aspects, which I have wanted to divulge more articulately in the past. Ignatius J. Riley is an arch-conservative who believes the Western world made a wrong turn at the Renaissance and seeks to go back to an absolute monarchy. He abhors modernity in all forms, but is resigned to begrudgingly respecting its presence in his life. He also believes himself in particular to be a cosmic plaything subject to the whims of a goddess he worships, Fortuna. Because of this role, he claims there is nothing he can do to fix his lot in life. His political beliefs are mentioned because it would not be until the early 2000s where his garbage opinions would be given a name to go with them: the neo-reactionary movement. Much like Ignatius, other scholars of this movement skew super right-wing and do not care about the freedoms of anyone other than themselves. Myrna Minkoff is one of the only other relevant characters in Dunces. She is a Jewish beatnik from New York who happens to be Ignatius's on-and-off-again girlfriend. Throughout most of the story, both Ignatius and Myrna form correspondence through written letters, of which make apparent how much they fascinate each other. Myrna is just as much of a shithead as Ignatius is, but is far more left-wing. Being a foil to the main protagonist, her role becomes what would later be coined as Manic Pixie Dream Girl, based on her desire to improve and enrich Ignatius as a human being, through unconventional means. She expresses it to the point of making him her pet project, which is a trait all later Manic Pixie Dream Girls inherit with their respective protagonists, an overwhelming majority of which are male. The biggest downside to her being the pioneer of MPDG as a trope is she only physically shows up towards the end of the story to be a deus ex machina on legs. Dunces claims to be a novel in the picaresque genre, which is a type of fiction comprising a collection of short stories involving a protagonist who typically resembles an anti-hero or a rogue, as they are often known. I can pick apart this claim rather easily. A picaresque uses the protagonist to condemn its story's society for being worse than him. While everyone is an insufferable turd, if I were to make a tier list of least awful to most awful characters, Ignatius himself is only less awful than one other character: Lana Lee, the Nazi bartender who mistreats her underlings and anybody she makes deals with. Dunces can instead be more accurately described as a slice-of-life situational comedy. Until much later on in the 1990s, slice-of-life sitcoms would not become a commonplace genre for novels, much less other media forms. In other words, Dunces has a lot more in common with Seinfeld than it does with Don Quixote. I have no buggering idea how to finish this video essay, aside from conceding one thing made clear from it. I missed the point of a Confederacy of Dunces. I wish I understood the message this book was trying to send, and my inability to do so is the primary reason this video essay took so long. I am tired, and just want to say this review is done. It has sapped too much of my energy at this point.